Women have been giving birth for centuries, so it's a pretty natural experience, right? Wrong. I'm Stephanie King, professional doula, childbirth educator, and the creator of the My Essential Birth course, the online childbirth education course that's helping women everywhere confidently achieve their best birth. Today's culture would have us think that birth should be treated like an illness or an emergency, and that most of us need other people telling us what's best for our bodies because we aren't the experts. So sit tight, because if you're tuning into this podcast, you'll probably start to believe in your body, your intuition, and find yourself empowered and confident to do what it takes to have the birth of your dreams. If you like listening to me take you through these weekly topics step by step, then you're going to love the My Essential Birth course. Make sure that you're subscribed to the podcast, and definitely head over to myessentialbirth.com for the free downloads mentioned right here in these episodes, and to join the birth course and community full of pregnant moms just like you. I have to add a disclaimer that I am not a medical professional and I cannot provide medical advice. All of the information expressed in this podcast are based off of personal, professional, and educational experiences and are my own opinions. Please work with a provider you trust for medical advice during your pregnancy and birth. Welcome, mamas, to this week's episode. I am obviously going to get started with a reviewer of the week. If you know me, I've been doing that for a while. If you leave a review, I love reading them right here on the podcast. If you haven't done that yet, go give this a review, click those stars, write me a review, and I'll read it here on the podcast, hopefully. But this one is from Morgan Adams 94, and she says, amazing. I started listening to this podcast in 2021. I had a miscarriage in 2020, and with so much fear with a new pregnancy in 2021, I wanted all the education I can get. This podcast has it all. Stephanie makes sure to give listeners so many resources, from professionals to positive birth stories. I have continued listening to the podcast as new information is helping me in my third pregnancy. I won't stop listening anytime soon. Thank you, Morgan, and I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're sticking it out and listening as you're in that third pregnancy. You guys, I found more and more and more information with every pregnancy I had. And so I hope that's speaking to you as well. Along with that, I'm going to dive into some information today that I think is going to be really useful for any mom that first, second, third, whatever pregnancy. However, if you particularly are RH negative, we're here to talk to you today because it's all about the RhoGAM shot. If you haven't heard of that yet, it's okay. I'm going to give you all the information you can handle today. But at your first prenatal appointment, something that you're going to have done, you always have that blood work, right? Something that they look for at that time is mom RH negative or is she RH positive? If you're RH positive, it's likely this episode is not for you. You're not going to hear about anything having to do with RhoGAM. But if you are RH negative, then keep listening. So what does it mean to have a negative blood type, and why does it matter? If you're not familiar with blood type, kind of how I said, there's either going to be a negative or a positive factor to your blood. The negative or positive indicates whether or not that RH factor is present in your blood. The RH factor itself it's a protein that's found on the surface of your blood cells, and it doesn't affect your health. It's not going to be anything negative for you in any way. It's just something that exists. But like I said, you won't even really hear it talked about unless you are RH negative and you are pregnant, because during pregnancy, this can play a factor in pregnancy and birth and your baby. So that's what we're going to talk about today. If you are RH negative, meaning that you have a negative blood type, then, and your baby is RH positive, or they have a positive blood type, then the concern is that even if a small amount of blood is mixed between mom and baby, that you can become what is called sensitized, and your body starts to create antibodies against that positive factor. And if that happens, then you can have concerns of things like miscarriage or other issues, birth defects, or other things that can happen during pregnancy when those two things are present and antibodies are created. So the most likely time that you would see this mixing of blood, that it would occur, is during it can occur sometimes during pregnancy, particularly if there's any kind of like bleeding during pregnancy. If you've heard of the term subchorionic hemorrhage or subchorionic hematoma, for example, that is where blood collects between there's a membrane that connects the chorion layer of your amniotic sac to the wall of your uterus. And if those have a little bit of a disconnect, you can have a hemorrhage or a hematoma within that area. And if that blood, because it's very thin, it's thick and it's thin at the same time, but basically it's like as close as you can get to the mixing of the blood, right? For mom and baby prior to actually giving birth, that they would be concerned about maybe some of those blood mixing at one point or another. So if that's something that you experience, then that's a factor. If you have like a fall on your belly, if you have a miscarriage, and then other things that were listed, and these actually came within the pamphlet that I'm going to talk about later, but if you have an amniocentesis or chorionic villus sampling, or if you choose to do an ECV or external cephalac version, meaning like a manual manipulation of the baby later, third trimester for a breech baby where you're manually trying to turn them into a non-breech position or a head down position. That was another thing that was listed on that pamphlet. I don't actually know personally of anybody that has had to have that as they're doing the ECV, but I also haven't asked that question a lot. And I haven't had an ECV myself, so I can't tell you if that's like super regular or not. However, I understand one of the concerns with an ECV or turning that baby, that manual manipulation, is that the placenta can detach. Obviously, that would be like an emergency cesarean birth. Then we would be talking about blood and all of that. However, as you'll learn later, even if there is mixing of blood, you can have that RhoGAM shot within 72 hours and it's still good. So I wanted to include that because it was on the pamphlet, but tell you I don't have all of the information regarding ECV and when they would or would not give you the RhoGAM shot. So if mom and dad, I thought this was interesting. If mom and dad are both Rh negative, then they're going to have a baby that is Rh negative. So the question becomes, do you need this shot of RhoGAM or not? And I will tell you, just as providers go, as the way that providers go, if you are Rh negative, whether or not dad is positive or negative, you're going to be treated as if that baby could be positive and therefore be offered the shot in an overabundance of caution. So just information to kind of have on the back end. Should you choose to not get it, that would be one of those situations where you could definitely weigh the options in that case. The truth is, you're not going to know baby's blood type until after they're born. And this is one of the reasons they do that blood test so quick after baby's born. They're looking for all kinds of things, but this is one of them. And it's because if you are Rh negative and you give birth to a baby that is positive, then they're going to want to make sure that you get that RhoGAM shot within 72 hours of birth so that you do not create those antibodies. And let's talk about that for a moment, because if the blood does get mixed for some purpose, and you heard me talk about it, if that happens, there can be something called sensitization, where your body starts to create those antibodies, or your blood creates those antibodies against that positive factor. Then what can happen? Well, first of all, it's a permanent thing. So once that happens, once the blood mixes and you create those antibodies, your body always creates those antibodies. So it's not just like it needs to flush out and we won't have to worry about it anymore. We can do RhoGAM the next time. That's not the case. So this is like a permanent, once this happens, it is forever. And that means that if there are future pregnancies, that it could cause issues down the line. So maybe this pregnancy went well. There was no blood mixed until the end when you gave birth. However, you didn't receive the RhoGAM and there was sensitization. Then for those next pregnancies, you may experience things like fetal anemia, miscarriage. That's probably the most common one, is like the body doesn't even allow the baby to grow. Like you keep having miscarriages afterwards. They can have jaundice, seizures, and obviously stillbirth. So, the severity of it varies, but generally speaking, if there are antibodies involved, it really does create a high probability of there being some complications moving forward. So I think it's important to talk about how we can prevent that from happening. Obviously, we're going to talk about the RhoGAM shots, and it's given as an injection. So, and I'm going to include for you guys too, I have the pamphlet that's going to read off all of the like risks, benefits, when to use it, when not to use it, all of that. There's a link for that in the show notes for this week, but it's not a vaccine, just so you're clear on that. It's specific to helping stop your blood from making antibodies from that positive factor, should those two things mix. It is made from human blood that it's actually made from human plasma that contains a very small amount of Rh positive proteins. So those proteins help your body to not make the antibodies that will attack the Rh positive baby's blood cells, if that makes sense. So as I'm saying, it's not a vaccine. It's similar in the sense that you're giving it a little bit of this thing and it's supposed to help, fight in the other direction to make sure you don't have antibodies, right? It's kind of funny that way. If nothing is done though, if you are an Rh negative mom, and your baby is Rh positive and there is mixing of blood and you do absolutely nothing, they say that 1 in 5 women, or in other words, about 20% of women where this is the case, will still develop that sensitization, which is a fairly high number, but I'm going to share a little bit of a story with you right now. So with my third baby, this baby was born at home. I did have the I had the RhoGAM shot because I am Rh negative. And my husband is positive. But I had the RhoGAM shot later in pregnancy. So around that 24, 28 week mark or whatever it was. And then if you remember anything about my story, we moved from overseas back to the States and I had a home birth midwife. It was lovely, lovely experience. After that baby was born though, a lot of hustle bustle. There were a lot of women in labor. One reason or another, we didn't do the blood test right away. We didn't do that until she came back a couple days later. Luckily, and I had intended to get the RhoGAM shot. But during that time, whatever happened, I did not receive the shot. And I honestly don't remember if it must have been that my baby was positive. I don't remember the situation, but I remember I was supposed to receive it and it was too late by the time she came back and she was very apologetic. She said, "I'm so sorry. I don't know how that slipped, how we missed that, but it got missed. And I'm really, really sorry." And I'm like, "It's fine. It's, not a big deal. I'm not going to worry about it. I was aware of the situation that could occur, for next pregnancies and things like that." And she did say, she's like, "It's likely it's not going to be a problem. However, just in case." It's not always that your blood mixes too. I should be really clear. Even during labor, it doesn't mean that mom and baby's blood are going to mix, but there is a chance that it can. So there you have it. Anyways, later we were trying to get pregnant and we've been trying for some time and I had gotten pregnant with all my other ones so easy. And I thought, oh my gosh, am I maybe miscarrying some babies or what is happening? So I ended up going into a local birth center. I had some friends there, some midwives, and I had brought that up. Could it be this? And so we had a conversation about it. And then she's like, "Well, let's just do the antibody test." So I did that. Everything was fine. I didn't have antibodies. I wasn't sensitized. And now I have unexplained secondary infertility. So whatever. I don't know what the reason is, but it wasn't that. So if for some reason, it's unlikely that it would get missed, but if for some reason in that very small chance like mine, it did get missed, just know the majority of the time, it's not going to be an issue even then. But probably best to get it. Definitely your choice, as with anything, even as I'm speaking about, there are a lot of positives with this RhoGAM shot, for example. It is absolutely your choice should you choose to have this or not. So you need to be aware of that as well. So like I had said, the most common time for the mixing of blood is at birth. And so there's 2 times that moms receive the shot, should you choose to do that. The first is about 24 to 28 weeks. That's another time. So remember, you have a blood test at the beginning of your pregnancy. And then about 24 to 28 weeks, you're given another blood test. You have blood tests all throughout. But this is one of them where they are checking for that sensitization. Was there any kind of mixing? We need to know because one of the times that you don't get it is if there is sensitization. So if you're planning on getting the RhoGAM shot, but you are sensitized, or you do have antibodies, then they're not going to give you the shot. That is don't do that. So they tested again 24 to 28 weeks, and then that is when you would receive that shot. And then you would receive it again because it lasts for 13 weeks. So imagine you're getting it at 28 weeks. It's hitting right about 41 weeks, right? That if anything happened in there, you'd be covered. And then after you have your baby, that shot will be offered again at within 72 hours. So shortly after giving birth. Now, after you give birth, if your baby is also negative because they test mom and they test baby, then you wouldn't need the second shot. So no big deal. You just have the one during pregnancy. It would have been preventative. You wouldn't even necessarily needed it, but you never know. And then now we've got, 72-hour window to be able to do that. And if your baby is Rh negative, then you don't have to worry about it at all. Remember, though, that even if that baby is Rh negative, this is something as far as RhoGAM goes that will need to be done with every pregnancy, anytime you have a miscarriage, and every birth that you have. This is not like a one and done. Like I said, it's not like a vaccine. It's not something like that where it like continues forever. So, or where it needs to be boosted. It's a very specific, it lasts for about this long. It's used for this amount of time, and it'll be offered at these different intervals, which would be pregnancy, any kind of miscarriage, anything like the amniocentesis and stuff like that. And then after you give birth, provided your baby is Rh positive. Now, how safe is the shot? Because I know this is something that, moms are going to be curious about. It's the same questions that we have for vaccines during pregnancy or vaccines for baby right after birth or in any of those stages. Right now, it is considered very safe. It's been around for 50 years. This is according to studies, research, and it's included in the pamphlet itself. But I will tell you a little bit about the possible side effects. So the main ones are things like hardening, soreness, and swelling at the injection site. You could have a slight fever, although that's less common. I did find this on the pamphlet itself, though, so I'm just going to read it word for word. So, it risks that are listed on the RhoGAM pamphlet. So it also states, quote, RhoGAM is prepared for human plasma and may contain infectious agents that cause disease. Numerous tests have been applied in the plasma collection process, and specific viral inactivation steps have been added to the manufacturing process to minimize the risk of transmission of diseases, but all risk cannot be eliminated, end quote. So just so that you guys are aware that, in other words, it can kind of read that something like HIV would actually be possible to get from using a shot like this. However, it is so rare and the process is so much so that it has never been reported. But because it is created from that human plasma, that human blood plasma, that is something that can happen. Now, if you have an allergic reaction to it, it would look like an itchy rash, tightening of the chest, wheezing, low blood pressure, anaphylaxis, which may include a swelling of the throat or tongue, shortness of breath, vomiting, lightheadedness, and or hives. So if you do have an allergic reaction, it's said that it should happen within about 20 minutes, which is why you have it at the doctor's office. They keep an eye on you. It's rare, but it's obviously something that is listed, and I think you have every right to know. So allergic reaction could happen, and those are what to look for. Times that it's not recommended. So if you are Rh positive, you do not need a RhoGAM shot. You don't need anything to do with it. If you have hemolytic anemia, if you are allergic to human immune globulin, because it is made from blood plasma, human blood plasma. If you have any allergies to that, you're not going to take it. And then moms who already have that Rh sensitization or who have already developed antibodies will obviously not be taking that as well. All right, so this was a shorter, kind of quick and to the point episode, but if this sounds like you, if you are this Rh negative mom, now you're going to have all the information that you need. You understand why it's being given, when you'll receive it, how they test for it, how it's going to affect you and your baby, whether or not you end up with that sensitization or not, which most moms will not. And if you get the shot, it's like much higher that you will not. And now you know about the safety. Like I said, you can go online, check out the show notes. You can read through the RhoGAM pamphlet itself and any other information that we have on there. So I guess I will be seeing you guys back next week. That's it for this week, but make sure you subscribe to the podcast so that you get notifications first as I drop a new episode every week. And don't forget to head over to myessentialbirth.com for all of the free downloads mentioned here and to join the birth course and community serving pregnant moms just like you. If you enjoyed this and other episodes, I would love it if you would take a few minutes to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. I read every single one and include one at the beginning of each episode. See you next week.